And I really felt from the Lord that even though a lot of wrong had been done to me, that I was to stand firm in the position that God had called me to and to not walk away.
The Lamb family drama has taken a turn no one expected. Jonathan and Suzy Lamb have come forward with revelations so explosive that Joni Lamb's entire career now hangs by a thread. What they've shared doesn't just touch on private family matters, it threatens to undo everything Joni has built over decades. The spotlight has shifted, the whispers have turned into headlines, and the shocking truth may finally be too big to silence.
Right now, Suzy and I are at an undisclosed location because we simply do not feel safe at our home. Now, please know that not only has Julie Roys been given all of the evidence and is writing a story that will be out soon, multiple national reporters have been given all of the evidence as of this afternoon.
The story of the Lamb family once looked like the picture of strength and unity, but that image shattered the moment Jonathan and Suzy stepped forward with allegations no one could have imagined. According to them, it all began in 2020 when their young daughter revealed something no parent ever wants to hear: that she had been molested. At first, the child didn't name who was responsible, but the suspicion hung heavy over the family. It was a shadow that wouldn't go away. By August 2021, during what should have been a peaceful family retreat in Florida, the situation reached a breaking point. Jonathan said he walked into a room and saw something no father should ever see. His daughter, unclothed, alone with a family member identified only as Pete. That moment changed everything. The disbelief, the anger, the fear, it all collided. For Jonathan and Suzy, the truth could no longer stay hidden. They reported their concerns and made it clear they believed something terribly wrong had happened. What followed, however, was almost as painful as the discovery itself. When they turned to Joni Lamb, the family matriarch and head of Daystar, they expected support, comfort, and action. Instead, they claimed she urged them to stay quiet, to keep the matter within the family, to protect the ministry and its reputation above all else. For Jonathan and Suzy, this felt like betrayal of the worst kind. Their daughter's trauma, in their eyes, was being pushed aside for the sake of image. They had hoped for a grandmother who would rally around them and their little girl. But what they felt they got was a leader more concerned with keeping scandal from touching Daystar's walls. The weight of this decision crushed the family bond. Jonathan and Suzy no longer felt safe in their own home. They said they had to leave and keep their location secret, fearing the fallout of speaking the truth. For them, the cost of silence was too high, even if it meant exposing the people they loved most. They believed that God was calling them to speak, no matter how much pain it brought, because protecting the innocent was worth every storm that would follow. And from that moment, the Lamb family was never the same again.
They should be reporting some stories that will be out in the news very shortly.
We never dreamed this would be our lives. We begged God for months and months that he would take it any other route. But we have to obey in the end. And if he says, you know what, you're the ones who have to speak, it's the harder road. It would have been easy to just walk away. But if he says, I'm calling you to do this, we have to do this. And it's been a challenge, but he has led us every step of the way, and he has given us so much peace.
When the storm broke open and Jonathan and Suzy began sharing their side of the story, people turned their eyes to Joni Lamb, waiting to see how she would respond. For months, whispers had spread, articles were being written, and questions were swirling across social media. The accusations were heavy, almost unthinkable. Claims that she, a grandmother and Christian leader, had discouraged her own son from going to the police after their little girl disclosed abuse. And when Joni finally spoke publicly, she did it in a way only she could. On her own platform, sitting in front of the cameras on her show Joni Table Talk, with a voice full of emotion, she looked directly into the lens and said the words that would define her defense. I never covered up anything. Marcus never covered up anything. For Joni, this wasn't just about a family crisis. It was about her reputation, her ministry, and everything she and her late husband had built together. She framed the accusations as not only false, but as part of a calculated effort to destroy her leadership. In her eyes, Jonathan and Suzy weren't acting as grieving parents seeking justice. They were, she said, bitter and vengeful. She told her audience that Jonathan was angry about being removed from Daystar, and that his disappointment in not being named his father's successor had twisted into something much darker. The accusations, she said, were born from that bitterness, not from truth. As she spoke, Joni's words carried both defiance and pain. She talked about how much she loved her family, how much she had poured into her children and grandchildren, and how devastated she was to be accused of such a thing. She reminded her viewers that she had spent her life serving God and leading one of the largest Christian broadcasting networks in the world. To her, it was unthinkable that people would believe she would ever protect someone guilty of hurting a child, especially her own granddaughter. She painted herself as the target of a smear campaign, orchestrated by those closest to her, and insisted that God knew her heart.
So I just want to encourage you, even though things will look horrible and it looks like turmoil, God always sees the bigger picture. And as long as we obey him, we stand in the truth, we tell the truth, he will take us through. And I know he will, but we do need and thank you for your prayers, because all that said, it has still been a hard journey. So thank you.
Yeah.
But while Joni denied any wrongdoing, she did not back down from fighting back against the narrative Jonathan and Suzy were sharing. She explained that Jonathan had been given a detailed improvement plan during his time at Daystar, and when he refused to follow it, his employment was terminated. She even revealed that she had offered to go through mediation with him, hoping to resolve their issues, but he declined. To Joni, this was further proof that Jonathan wasn't interested in reconciliation, only in revenge. She believed that his accusations had less to do with justice for his daughter and more to do with anger over losing his place within the ministry. She also pointed out that the original police investigation had been closed. Authorities, she reminded everyone, had found no conclusive evidence at the time, largely because her granddaughter had been unable to share enough detail. For Joni, that was proof that there had been no cover-up, no wrongdoing, just a tragic situation made worse by Jonathan and Suzy's persistence in dragging the family through public shame. She emphasized that the case was only reopened years later, right after Jonathan's removal from Daystar, which in her view was no coincidence. To her, the timing said everything. It was opportunism, not truth. Still, her passionate denial did little to ease the growing doubts among critics. Many watching felt that her refusal to acknowledge even the possibility of mistakes made her sound defensive rather than transparent. Instead of offering compassion for her granddaughter's pain, she seemed more focused on defending her own image and the reputation of Daystar. That perception became one of the most damaging parts of her response. Where many hoped for humility and accountability, they found only resistance. Yet, Joni held firm. She reminded her audience that her husband Marcus had also been accused of things in the past, and he too had stayed faithful until the end. She said that she would continue that same fight, no matter how much it hurt. To her supporters, her tears and determination were enough. They believed her. They saw Jonathan and Suzy as misguided, even manipulated, and rallied behind Joni as a woman of God under attack. Letters of encouragement poured in, prayers were offered on her behalf, and many in the Christian community defended her as someone unfairly maligned by her own blood. But outside of her circle of loyal followers, Joni's denials rang hollow for others. They questioned why she hadn't been more vocal from the very beginning, why she hadn't insisted on a full investigation at the time of the first disclosure. If she had nothing to hide, why discourage her son and daughter-in-law from going to the police? Those unanswered questions lingered, and Joni's refusal to directly address them left critics even more convinced that she cared more about protecting Daystar than about seeking justice. As time went on, Joni leaned even more heavily into framing the scandal as spiritual warfare. She told her audience that the enemy was working overtime to destroy her, her family, and the ministry God had entrusted to her. She said that while the attacks were painful, she knew God would bring the truth to light in his timing. She asked for prayers, not just for herself, but for her family, that they might find healing and unity again. But even in those pleas, there was no admission of fault, no room for compromise, only a firm insistence that she was innocent and her accusers were wrong. Her words have left the Lamb family divided in a way that seems beyond repair. Jonathan and Suzy remain steadfast in their pursuit of accountability, while Joni continues to present herself as the victim of a malicious attack. Each side tells a story that contradicts the other, and the wider Christian community has been left to choose who to believe. For some, Joni is still the faithful leader they have followed for decades. For others, her denial only deepens their suspicion that something is being hidden. What is certain is that Joni's response has ensured the controversy will not fade quietly. By rejecting any possibility of wrongdoing and painting the entire ordeal as a smear campaign, she has drawn a clear line between herself and those accusing her, and in doing so, she has guaranteed that the scandal will continue to cast a long shadow over her family, her ministry, and the legacy she has spent her life trying to build. The story of the Lamb family scandal quickly spilled beyond the private pain of a household and into the public square, raising questions that no amount of denial could silence. At the heart of it all was a child, a disclosure of abuse, and a family caught between faith, loyalty, and the law. When Jonathan and Suzy first went to their mother with their daughter's words, they expected a rallying of support, a determination to seek justice. Instead, what they claimed they found was resistance. According to them, Joni urged caution, even secrecy. Whether she intended to or not, her response opened a door to some of the most pressing legal and ethical debates a family and a ministry could face. In Texas, the law is clear. Any suspicion of child abuse must be reported to law enforcement without delay. It isn't optional. It isn't something to pray over first. It isn't something to handle internally. The state requires it, and for good reason. Children are vulnerable, and the law was designed to put their safety above everything else. Jonathan and Suzy maintain that they did fulfill this obligation, reporting their concerns when the situation first became undeniable. But the weight of their accusations against Joni is that she tried to steer them away from that path, urging them to keep things private for the sake of the family and the ministry. If true, that choice doesn't just raise questions about judgment, it touches the boundaries of legality. Even when the initial investigation closed, because there wasn't enough detail for authorities to move forward, the matter didn't vanish. Trauma can silence children, and without their voices, cases often collapse. But ethically, the responsibility of the adults remained the same: to stand firmly with the child, to create an environment where safety was unquestioned and secrecy was unthinkable. Critics of Joni say that instead, she focused on the image of Daystar, weighing the ministry's reputation more heavily than the cries of her granddaughter. For many watching, that decision represented not just a personal failing, but a moral crisis in leadership. Religious organizations often walk a tightrope between spiritual principles and legal obligations. Within churches and ministries, there is a long history of attempting to resolve matters privately, guided by biblical reconciliation rather than public exposure. But when the allegations are as serious as abuse, those traditions collide with the law. In this case, the Lamb family became a symbol of that collision. Could a grandmother, who led a network preaching morality to millions, have really chosen silence over transparency? And if she did, what does that say about the culture within institutions like Daystar, where family legacy and public image are bound so tightly together? The ethical questions stretch far beyond one family. They reach into the wider Christian community, into the homes of viewers who had trusted Daystar as a moral compass. Supporters of Joni argue that Jonathan and Suzy are motivated by personal hurt, that their timeline is flawed, and that their accusations come more from bitterness than truth. But even among those supporters, there is unease. Because, even if the details are disputed, the idea that such serious allegations might have been handled quietly rather than decisively leaves a deep wound. Faith, after all, is built on trust. And trust is fragile. For Joni herself, the legal and ethical questions have become inseparable. She insists that she never covered anything up, that she never discouraged her son from seeking justice. To her, the entire scandal is a false narrative, a smear designed to destroy her reputation and discredit her leadership. But the more firmly she denies, the louder the questions seem to echo. Why wasn't more done when the first disclosure happened? Why wasn't the situation placed fully in the hands of law enforcement immediately? And even if the law was technically followed, did she, as a leader and grandmother, do everything she could to protect the child at the center of it all? Beyond the family's internal conflict, the situation also raises another ethical layer: the responsibility of leaders in the public eye. Daystar was built as a ministry to spread faith, hope, and truth. Millions tuned in, trusting the voices on screen to live by the same values they preached. When allegations like this surface, it isn't just the family under scrutiny. It's the institution itself. Can an organization continue to call itself a beacon of Christian values if its leaders are accused of protecting image over innocence? And if the leadership refuses to step aside during such an investigation, what does that say about accountability within religious organizations? Legal experts who have watched similar scandals unfold in other ministries warn that the consequences go far beyond courtrooms. When churches or networks mishandle abuse allegations, they risk losing the very foundation of their moral authority. Donations dry up, audiences drift away, and the credibility that took decades to build can crumble in months. For Daystar, already shaken by the death of Marcus Lamb and the controversies that followed. The ethical fallout of these accusations may be just as damaging as any legal verdict. There is also the question of justice delayed. The case was reopened years later, after new evidence reportedly surfaced. That in itself raises hard questions. If more had been done at the beginning, could justice have come sooner? Could the child at the center of this have been spared years of doubt, fear, and whispers? Every step of delay, every conversation kept private, carries a weight that can never fully be lifted. And yet, even with so much at stake, the battle lines remain drawn. On one side, Jonathan and Suzy, who believe they are walking the hard road of truth and accountability, no matter the cost. On the other side, Joni, who says she is being unfairly targeted and misrepresented, holding fast to her denial. In between them lies a child, a ministry, and a community left to wrestle with the legal requirements, the ethical expectations, and the painful reality that faith alone does not erase responsibility. The questions will not disappear no matter how many times they are denied. Did Joni fail in her duty as a grandmother and a leader? Did she allow fear of scandal to outweigh the cry for justice? Or is she, as she claims, a victim of bitterness and lies? The answers may come slowly, through courts and investigations, but the ethical weight of those questions is already clear. For those who once trusted her leadership, the damage is done. Whether she is found guilty of wrongdoing or not, the shadow of hesitation in the face of such a serious allegation is enough to make many wonder if the values Daystar preached have been betrayed from within. When the story first broke, it was whispered in private conversations and online forums. A few blog posts here, a handful of social media comments there. But it didn't take long before the allegations against Joni Lamb and the Daystar network were dragged into the full light of national attention. What began as a family dispute had suddenly become headline news, and once the media locked in on the story, there was no going back. Reporters love a narrative that mixes faith, power, money, and betrayal, and this story had all of it. A beloved Christian broadcasting family, a ministry that reached millions around the world, and now dark allegations of abuse and cover-up. From the first articles that appeared in Christian outlets to the moment major networks picked it up, the scandal snowballed. Each new report added fuel to the fire, painting Joni not just as a grandmother in grief, but as a leader under siege. Jonathan and Suzy's decision to come forward publicly marked a turning point. They weren't just speaking to family anymore, they were speaking to the world. Their interviews, their emotional statements, even their visible fear of retaliation, all of it made for powerful television. News anchors introduced segments with dramatic language asking questions like, did one of America's most famous Christian families fail to protect their own? Talk shows debated the case, bringing in both legal experts and pastors to weigh in. The public was hooked, and the media wasn't going to let the story slip away quietly. For Joni, the scrutiny was unbearable. Every word she spoke on her own program was dissected by commentators. Clips of her tearful denials went viral, but instead of sympathy, they often drew sharp criticism. Some viewers said her delivery felt rehearsed, more like a defense strategy than a heartfelt plea. Others accused her of weaponizing faith language, turning what many saw as a legal and moral failure into a spiritual battle narrative. Whether fair or not, the perception began to solidify that she was more interested in saving her reputation than protecting her family. Social media only made things worse. Hashtags began trending, some supporting Jonathan and Suzy, others rallying behind Joni. Former Daystar employees started to speak out online, some backing up Jonathan's claims, others dismissing them as bitterness. Old clips of Marcus and Joni preaching about integrity and truth resurfaced, now recirculated with biting captions that asked if those words had ever really meant anything. The more Joni tried to frame the scandal as an attack from the enemy, the more people accused her of dodging the real issue. The fallout wasn't just reputational, it was practical. Donors began pulling back. Churches that had once proudly partnered with Daystar started to distance themselves. Some quietly removed Daystar programming from their recommendations. Advocacy groups used the scandal as an example of how religious institutions too often mishandle abuse allegations. Each move chipped away at the credibility Daystar had worked for decades to build. The family division also became part of the spectacle. News outlets highlighted Jonathan's heartfelt letters to his mother, contrasting them with Joni's public denials. Headlines framed it as a battle for the soul of Daystar. For audiences, it became more than just a news story. It was a drama playing out in real time, a clash between loyalty to family and loyalty to truth. And as with most dramas, the audience was quick to take sides. The Christian community itself fractured under the pressure. Some pastors openly defended Joni, saying the accusations were exaggerated or even fabricated. Others demanded accountability, insisting that no leader, no matter how prominent, should be shielded from scrutiny. Congregations split in their opinions, with heated arguments spilling into Sunday school classes and Bible studies. What was once a unifying network of faith suddenly looked like a battlefield. For Joni, the hardest blow was the loss of trust. Daystar wasn't just a media empire, it was a ministry built on the promise of authenticity, of living out the values it preached. With every article, every headline, every viral post, that promise was questioned. And no matter how many times she denied wrongdoing, the shadow of doubt grew heavier. The media's relentless attention ensured that the scandal stayed alive far longer than Joni or her supporters hoped. Even when new developments slowed, speculation kept it burning. Documentaries and podcasts picked it up, offering their own deep dives into the family's history and the allegations. What had once been a private crisis had become a permanent part of Joni's public identity. The fallout reached beyond Daystar itself. For many viewers and believers, it forced a reckoning with the broader issue of accountability in religious institutions. If it could happen at Daystar, where else was it happening? How many leaders had chosen silence over justice? How many victims had been overlooked for the sake of reputation? Joni's story became a symbol, not just of one family's collapse, but of a larger problem too big to ignore. In the end, the media scrutiny didn't just expose the cracks in Joni's leadership, it widened them. Every attempt to defend herself seemed to deepen the divide. The court of public opinion had already spoken, and for many, it didn't matter what the final legal outcome would be. The damage was done. The fallout was real. And the once glittering legacy of Daystar now carried a stain that no amount of televised prayers or emotional denials could wash away.